Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do. But what about the no-names who spent their whole lives long snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys, remember that guy. Remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy. They're just gonna remember some guys now.
19-game winning streak on the line here for the A's. Front runners in the American League West right now. 3 up on the Angels. Swung on. Fly ball deep right field. They've done it again. Oh my God. They let an 11-run lead. Remember that guy? The show we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players, past and present. Hey there, folks. It's me, one of your hosts, James. And with me, as always, is someone here to tell you exactly how easy it is to play first base.
All you got to do is stand there and catch it, man. Anybody can do it. I can do it. Diaz, your very special guest. I'm not a very special guest. I'm a co-host, but we do have a very special guest. And he is a man who is not confused about his place in this podcast. Please introduce yourself.
That's right. It's me, Eric Adams. And I did not take money from Turkey. And that's why I'm on this podcast to make sure everyone knows that I am not a crook. And do you think Eric Adams would actually say Turkey? There's zero chance. I'm trying to embody Eric Adams here. I think my favorite thing from the indictment is one paragraph. Again, all this is alleged, to be safe. One of the facilitators of the bribes was texting with an Eric Adams staffer about, a $100,000 bribe. The Adams staffer replied, "I think he wouldn't get involved in such games. They might cause a big stink later on, but I'll ask anyways." After this conversation, the Adams staffer asked Adams whether the Adams staffer should pursue the unlawful foreign contributions offered by the promoter. And contrary to the Adams staffer's expectations, Adams directed the Adams staffer pursue the promoter's illegal scheme. So this staffer was like, "I'm pretty sure that's illegal, but I'll ask my boss anyway." And Eric Adams says, "Yeah, take the money. Take the Turkish money."
Well, we are not New York City residents, so while Eric Adams is making national memories for us all, I would like to know what more specifically is making memories for the two of you right now.
Other things that are a shit show that are making memories for me: conference realignment. It's so fun. And the biggest shit show in the world. To the point where, for those who haven't been keeping up with it,
God bless you.
A couple weeks ago, the Pac-2, Washington State and Oregon State, poached Boise State, Colorado State, San Diego State, and Fresno State from the Mountain West. This is after a year where the Mountain West and the Pac-2 came to a scheduling agreement because the Pac-2 had no one to play. There were discussions about, just merging because it's one group of 12 and one group of 2. There's a very simple solution here, but everyone wants to do their own thing, control their own brand. The scheduling agreement would have doubled in price for a second season, and the Pac-2 didn't want to do that, so they just poached the 4 best teams from the Mountain West.
What if instead of paying you, we just immediately devalued your entire organization by 50%?
Yes. Then their first plan was to make a kind of a best of the G5 or G6 now by taking Memphis, Tulane, USF, and UTSA from the American. There were numbers like it could get the TV deal to 10 to 15 million, which sounds like a lot, is very little compared to, the SEC, Big 10, 40 plus mil, 50 plus mil, and even the Big 12 and ACC are in the 30 mil area. But the Mountain West was in 4 mil and the American was in 7 mil, so 10, significant. But that's an aspirational number. They have no TV deal right now, and that's a lot of travel. In the end, it was too much uncertainty, and the American schools recommitted to the American. At that point, the Pac-6 now were spiraling a bit because now it was, all right, go back to the Mountain West and try to steal more Mountain West teams? Their goal was to get UNLV, the next biggest brand, and possibly Air Force, and then maybe Utah State. Utah State decides to join, which is funny because Utah State just lost to Temple, who we thought might go 0-12 this year. So Utah State is at least worse than Temple.
Well, and while we're here for a second, let me just say the name. If Temple football still exists in 5 years, we have one man to thank, and it is Maddox Trujillo, because our Owls, down 21-14 at the end of the first half, looking like another loss. What does this motherfucker Maddox Trujillo do? Well, first of all, he's a kicker. So what he does as a kicker is he sets the Lincoln Financial Field record where the Philadelphia Eagles play with a 64-yard field goal to make it 21-17 at half. Owls still down. But they ride the momentum. They go on to win that game. If the program survives, that might have been the kick that saved Temple football. And it probably didn't, and we're probably no longer existing in like 3 years. But if the program survives, Maddox Trujillo. But yes, Utah State to the Pac-12.
Yeah, so Utah State joins, and they are trying to get UNLV, because at this point, with Utah State joining, the Pac now has 7. The Mountain West has 7 football members, but 6 full members, and you need 8 to be a real conference. So 7 and 7 suits nobody. And they're trying to get UNLV and possibly Air Force. But with all of the money that the Mountain West now has from the exit fees, they got those schools to commit to stay through 2032 by paying them massive amounts of money. So now they're both kind of stuck at 7 and trying to figure out how to get more. But not only that, the Pac has now sued the Mountain West as part of the scheduling agreement that they had come to. So not only is there the exit fees, which are like $18 million per school, so 5 schools leaving, that's $90 million. Again, for schools that did not have a lot of money to start out with, because their TV deal was, $4+ million? Right now, the estimates are maybe they could get $8 million with this iteration of the Pac. So it's not even a significant bump. But that's $90 million war chest to the Mountain West. As part of the scheduling agreement, they had a poaching penalty added in. If the Pac tried to steal any Mountain West teams, they would have to pay, I think it was $10 million per school, and it would rise for scaling up for every school they took. So not only is the $90 million exit fees owed for those 5 schools, currently a $50+ million poaching penalty is owed. And so the Pac is suing over that, saying, yes, we agreed to it in that contract that we signed last year, but it was under duress because we had no other options, and it was an unenforceable restraint of trade. And so they're trying to argue that, yes, we signed this, but it was illegal anyway, so it shouldn't matter, in order to save themselves $50 million in hopes that they can then use that $50 million to possibly try to poach more Mountain West schools, or come back to Memphis and Tulane and say, hey, we can pay your $25 million exit fee now if we don't have to pay $50 million more to the Mountain West. Regardless of what happens there, I don't think they'll win that. I can't see it. That's a hard argument.
To remind everybody, this is a literal lawyer saying that's probably not going to work.
That's a hard argument to make.
It's weird that the fact that you have worked on abandoned property law in Oregon does actually kind of feel relevant to this.
The abandoned conference of the Pac and the Mountain West. But they still each need more teams. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the other schools. Sacramento State put out a press release saying that they were exploring moving up to the Pac-12 or the Mountain West, like specifically saying Pac-12, which is very funny to think about. 3 years ago, with an FCS Sacramento State team saying, we're interested in going to the Pac-12, get anything more than like a chuckle. But it would give them 8 state teams, and they could just be the Pac-8 state or whatever. The Mountain West could get New Mexico State to have both New Mexicos or Texas State. In the end, I think it's going to be 2 conferences that should really be one conference that make no more money than the American and are definitely still a group of 6 conference. And it will have cost millions and millions and millions of dollars in exit fees and attorney's fees to do absolutely nothing. Knock on wood, because, things can change in a minute, but it feels like the biggest waste of time and money of all college football history, which is saying something when one of the parties just had their starting quarterback sit out because he didn't get paid the $100,000 that he claimed he was promised.
Matthew Sluka, Holy Cross legend, person whose games I've worked at least 3 times. And let me just say, all this conference realignment, it's so fucking stupid. It's the biggest waste of time. It is like, if sports are currency, conference realignment is Bitcoin. Like, this is doing nothing for anybody. Just fucking stop it.
Well, and you think of like all of the championship baseball teams and all of the Olympians, and also like all of the fucking walk-ons on some slapdick sport that we don't give a shit about, whose lives are just being completely upended by a bunch of idiots fighting over college football TV money. And it's just frustrating. It's just very deeply frustrating.
There is no amateurism. There is no catharsis. The Emperor is like fully nude. The Emperor has no
Can
clothes.
football just be a different thing? Like, I know that it subsidizes everything else and it should continue to do that, but can it just be its own fucking thing?
I mean, like, this is where the American sports infrastructure is just so far behind what Europe does, because it's like, in Europe, the really good kids go to academies. They go to professional academies so that they can be developed earlier. I think there's absolutely still a place for collegiate athletics, but like, we need to separate. You want to go to the pros? Here's amateurism. And you can go to college and then still go to the pros, but like, we need to stop with this fucking college football is just the minor leagues of pro football, because like, it's only going to get more and more absurd. There's going to be more Matthew Slukas. There's going to be more Pac-8 Mountain West bullshit. At this point, it's like the powers that be are trying to cling to what once was, and are ignoring that what once was is like 20 years in the past at this point.
That's the thing about the old days. They're the old days. And we're still here in the present day. Diaz, other than this shit show, what is it that's making memories for you this week?
Well, I already talked about Maddox Trujillo, who may have saved Temple football. And, you know, relatedly, another Philadelphia institution wearing the red, although this is a more traditional red as opposed to the cherry. It's Red October, baby. By the time this comes out, the Phillies will not be playing baseball because they got that first round bye. In spite of I hesitate to say this because, James, you've had to watch some like god awful Orioles stretches. For a team that pretends to be a World Series contender, the Phillies had like two of the worst months I've ever seen. But here we are. It's the end of the season. They might get the 1 seed. They might not. At least they got the bye. This run is like so very different from the last two. 2022 was just pure like found money. From the second that they got in to play the Cardinals, the whole thing was found money. And we've talked about it before, but it's like the idea of like the most fun to root for a team is a team that wasn't supposed to be here, but is here and will continue to be here in the future. And then the 23, we had the redemption arc. It seemed inevitable. And then you fucking fall flat on your face with 2 chances to go to the World Series at home. This is the first time, and like, not that there weren't expectations last year.
There's pressure this time. Like, last time there were expectations, and it is transmogrified into pressure.
Right. Like, Garrett Stubbs, our backup catcher, fucking running around with beers in his overalls. That's no longer cute if they don't win the World Series this year. Nick Castellanos being a dumb himbo that chases everything outside of the zone but randomly gets hot for 2 months at a time, that stops being cute if they don't win the World Series this year. Bryce Harper probably still will get a pass because that man is an elite panderer, but the clock is ticking on all of these guys. And like, I shudder to think, I don't think there is another team in MLB that has more pressure to win this specific World Series than this Phillies team. Because like, the Yankees, obviously, I'm not saying they aren't a very legitimate contender. They are. They're maybe even more likely to win it than the Phillies. But they have not beat their chests as hard as these Phillies have. Nor have the Dodgers. There has been no team in baseball that has been more loud and obnoxious about how good they are than these Phillies. And it's like, it's time to shit or get off the pot. It really is. And, you know, I'm rooting for them. I'm very optimistic. I think as far as top line starters, you're not going to do much better than Wheeler and Nola. You get 4 out of 7 starts by Wheeler and Nola in a 7-game set. You should win that series. But that's what the beautiful thing about this sport is. You play 162 games to figure out who's good and who's not. And then all of a sudden, it can be over in 3.
It can be over in 2 now.
It can be over in 2 now. We've had enough luck there. But I don't know, man. The vibe is demonstrably different. And they better be damn sure that they're going to win the World Series if they're going to continue with Dancing on My Own as the theme song. Because it's already not a great choice. It's kind of a song about getting cucked. And it will be the ultimate cucks of baseball if they do not get this World Series. So it could be the most fitting anthem of all time. But go Phils, baby.
World Series to determine the fate of New Jersey.
Yeah, the I-95 series. That would be fun to do again. It worked out great for you last time, Xavier.
I don't know. I wouldn't want it. I didn't like when the Knicks were playing the Sixers.
Yeah, but to the point of and I've said this before on this podcast, it's I still love the Eagles. I still love the Phillies. I am still deranged about the Sixers because they have not gotten me a championship yet. All I need is one, and I'll be at peace. And I think that's the difference between that Sixers-Knicks series for the two of us, where you've seen the Yankees win plenty of times, but with our Sixers and our Knicks, they are the one that continues to get away. So I think that paints it a little different. I think we could watch a Phillies-Yankees World Series game together, Xavier, and I don't think we would punch each other.
Possibly. I am also less fanatic about the Yankees, but I cannot guarantee how my emotions would feel in the moment.
I mean, all it takes is one fastball from Zach Wheeler that goes off Aaron Judge's hand and maybe breaks his finger, and then you think it was intentional, and I say you're a bitch, and then we're there. So you can never rule it out.
I got a quick one this week. I have recently become aware of an athlete that I want to inform you all of. It's an ultramarathon runner. Her name's Camille Herron. Have either of you heard of her for any reason?
Has she done the Barclays?
I don't believe so. I don't believe she's done the Barclays. She's done something else very, very stupid. Xavier, you could check her Wikipedia page maybe, see if she is, because that's actually what I want to talk about, her Wikipedia pages. Specifically, the other Wikipedia pages that she has interacted with recently. So Camille Herron is a pretty good ultramarathoner. I will start by saying that. Seems to be one of the best current ultramarathoners. She also has a husband, and her coach, Connor Holt, serves in both capacities. Apparently, they're both kind of jackasses and have had a reputation for, as I called it last week, hall monitor shit, with trying to ding people for rules to get that extra little advantage. So that's apparently kind of a known reputation for them, but it is kicked up a notch. Until February 2024, the two of them, or just Connor, but with input from Camille, they had a Wikipedia account called Tempo Run 73. This has been tied to an email that Connor Holt has with that same number. Tempo, run, year of his birth, makes sense. This account was suspended because they had been cutting a swath across the Wikipedia pages of other ultramarathoners and just taking stuff out of their pages. Now, this would very often be the things in the first paragraph where it's describing someone as widely regarded as one of the best ultramarathoners, et cetera, et cetera. They would cut this out and they would cite puffery as the reason. Okay, whatever. They would then go and put the exact same kinds of sentences in Camille Herron's page, immediately after cutting this out. And this went on to a point where they had to ban the account from doing this too much. The reason this has come up, the pages of, let me go through a couple of them just to give them credit. Killian Jornet, Courtney DeMalter, Des Linda, Stein Clark, Giannis Koros. These pages recently have been getting attacked once again by a new account, Run D Bowie, which has been identified as having the exact same email address as Connor Holt and the same IP address as Camille Herron. So they got banned for doing this on Wikipedia, created a fake account to get around this, and got banned a second time. And so now this has become apparently an enormous story in the ultramarathon running world, just totally shitting on these two assholes. And I just think a lot about how Wikipedia, look, we are not out here just reading Wikipedia for our presentations, but very often many of the stories we tell here, they begin with Wikipedia because it is a great resource. It's one of the last good things on the internet that just continues to become shittier and shittier. The internet, not Wikipedia. It's still great in spite of the efforts of people like Camille Herron and Connor Holt. So fuck those guys for trying to mess with Wikipedia. It really grinds my gears. And I just want to take a second to not shout them out, single them out, and shame them for what they're doing to one of the last great resources on the internet.
That's incredible hater energy. To even spend 5 minutes on Wikipedia to edit someone's page to make them look worse. That's a barrier. I have to make a Wikipedia account. 99% of people who go on Wikipedia do not have a Wikipedia account. You're just checking something.
I am the 1%. I have made Wikipedia edits, by the way. I just want to make it clear, I had a period in high school where I would just update, the Wikipedia pages for athletes with up-to-date scores every week or so, just so we know, where I'm coming from.
James, that's the least surprising thing ever. I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, but now it's codified.
To negatively edit rivals solely for your own personal petty gain is immense hater energy.
I mean, it's less about, like, you bring up the barrier of, like, oh, it takes 5 minutes. Like, I mean, we're talking about motherfuckers that will run for, like, 10 days consecutively sometimes. These are not well-adjusted people to begin with. Like, let's be clear. What's upsetting about that is, like, one of the things that I found, like, great about the running community as I've gotten into it is, like, by and large, it's a whole bunch of people who just want to see everybody doing the best that they can. Like, whether you're a 3-hour marathoner or you're a 6-hour marathoner, it's the same distance, and it's the same accomplishment for both of those people. So it runs so contrary to the idea of running that I have, at least as a community, that she has all these records, yet that's still not enough, and you still need to put down any kind of slight perceived threat. That's lame. Keep the ladder down. Don't pull it up, and don't edit the ladder out of existence.
One last thing I will say on this is I spent some time on running forums trying to get a little bit of background info on this. There are other catty bitches in the running forums beyond these two. I don't think other people are going out and making Wikipedia edits. I do want to make it clear that I agree with you. I think largely, whether it be your level of running or ultramarathon running or any other equivalent sport, very supportive community. There are some other catty bitches out there. Forums
for small sports are fucking incredible.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I've learned from doing this podcast for so long. If I'm doing someone that's not, a super mainstream athlete, if you look back in a forum 10, 20 years ago, there's going to be the funniest threads you will ever read.
Speaking of the guys that we discuss, we've got some guys today. The privilege, once again, falls to me to select the category for them. I think it's just true of all three of us. Sometimes the category comes first. Sometimes the guy comes first. Sometimes there's a story we've been sitting on that we just can't wait to get out. So you have to figure out the category, kind of reverse engineering it from that. And so you have to decide what lens it is that you want to really view this story through. What is the kind of story you want to foreshadow when you debut this guy, and how you want people to be considering it as you go through. So with that whole preface, the acknowledgement that this category is about to be foreshadowing, I want to talk about guys who lived a double life.
I know you too well to know that I'm 99.9% sure who you're going to talk about.
I mean, I'll just say the name then. The guy we're talking about today is Moe Berg, and let's start there. Born in an upper Manhattan tenement in 1902 to a pair of Russian Jewish immigrants. One thing to know about Moe, he might legitimately be a genius. By the age of 3, already begging his mom to send him to school. And this early start means that he graduates high school in 1918 as a 16-year-old before enrolling in NYU. Moe Berg, clearly loves school. He is a nerd. But even more than that is his love of baseball, which he started playing at the age of 7 in Newark after they'd moved across the river to New Jersey. Dad moved the family there specifically to be in a less Jewish area. And that means growing up, he has this fundamental difference with all of his teammates, that he is Jewish and they are not. He is playing for a Methodist Episcopal church at first to really drive that home. And he starts to very early on live with this sense of duplicity. He's even using a fake name at this point, Runt Wolf. Already living these kinds of double lives. Methodist Episcopal League for a little Jewish kid is very, very entertaining to me. And he does eventually, after growing through this and getting familiarity with the community, with his teammates, he is able to play by his own name in high school and becomes a renowned third baseman who's going to play for NYU when he gets there at 16, because all of his high school baseball career has been from the ages of 13 to 16 while he's been getting all of this big hype. He only stays at NYU for 1 year before eventually going back to New Jersey, becoming a Princeton Tiger. From this point forward, he drops any mention of having been at NYU from his life and presents himself exclusively as a Princeton man, for all the extra connotations that has at this point in American history. This is the college sports era of the Big Three: Princeton, Harvard, and Yale, mostly in football, but early 20s, this is also applying to baseball. Here at Princeton, Moe once again makes the team. He is a 3-year starter at third base and shortstop, so killing it on the left side of the infield. He is a captain his senior season. He is still, though, a little bit of an outsider to the very, very waspy Princeton, and I considered Josie Reisman's story a lot about Paul Heyman while thinking through Moe Berg because of the emphasis that she kept putting on like Paul Heyman's innate ability to sort of survive. And that's something that I think comes to mind as Moe Berg. Like this status of Princeton man is the first instance of him, along with Runt Wolf, adopting names because it makes it easier for him to be out there. He graduates Princeton, 24th in his class, magna cum laude, in modern languages. Real quick, I'm just going to list off all of the languages that Moe Berg is fluent in when he graduates. Latin, Greek, Italian, French, Spanish, German, and Sanskrit. He's actually so good at Latin that another one of the players, a second baseman, also a fucking nerd, they communicate in Latin on the field to make sure that like none of the batters can hear any of their signs or anything like that. That's Princeton baseball for you, baby. At this time, the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Robins, later the Dodgers, but still the Robins at this point, they see this growing Jewish population in New York City, and they both decide, I'm using the quotes from the papers at the time, that they need some Jewish blood. So, start reaching out to local prospects. The Giants are set at shortstop at this point, so it's the Robins that offer Moe a contract. He is already gearing up to go to Columbia Law School at this point. That's what his family wants him to do. But he meets this lawyer, Dutch Carter, who, like him, had been a very good college player. And then he graduated, and his family pushed him into just immediately going into law. He's like, guy, there's going to be plenty of time to be a lawyer. You need to seize this opportunity. Like, you will regret it forever, as I did. And so Moe Berg, in June of 2023, signs with the Brooklyn Robins.
1923.
1923, yes. He immediately makes the team. 4 days later, he debuts in Brooklyn. He is already, by this point, an amazing defender, keeps that going from his college and high school reputation, and he gets pretty consistent play time at short, and he's at the plate, he's slashing 186, 199, 240. And we have exited the dead ball era, so that's really bad. He is also still pretty big nerd. In the offseason, he goes to France to enroll in classes at the Sorbonne. Hangs out there significantly longer than anyone expected, comes back in spring, and he hasn't done any offseason work in baseball because he's been taking classes in French at the Sorbonne. Immediately, the manager can tell he cannot hit a lick. They end up sending him to the Minneapolis Millers, and he just spends 2 years in the minor leagues not playing particularly well. He's there in Toledo with the Mud Hens, and then he's in Reading, PA with the Keystone. One of the best summations of his skills at this point, there is a Cuban scout / catcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, Mike Gonzalez. At one point, Cardinals, they're scouting, they find this guy, they're like, how is he? And Mike Gonzalez scouts for him. Mike Gonzalez, being Cuban, not very good at English, so he just sends the 4 words, good field, no hit. The Reading Keystones have an affiliation with the Chicago White Sox, and after 2025, they exercise an option. He ends up joining the team late because he continues to be in law school, but he does eventually join the team. And in 1927, there's a very pivotal moment. It's late August, and all 3 of the catchers, which includes the player manager, all 3 of them on the depth chart, and so the manager cries out to the dugout as the apocryphal tale, who is going to catch for me? And a voice pops up that says, I. It says again, who? And Moe Berg speaks up, I. And the alleged response from the manager is, if you were a ball player, you'd have said me, but get in there. Gives him the gear, and he goes out and, like the smartest ball player in the league and a very good defender, ends up being a pretty good defensive catcher. That smartest player in the league, like that is the reputation he has with everybody. Described as the former Columbian, Princetonian, and Sorbonian. Like very much he is the interesting nerd guy. And he gets now this also good reputation of a good field, no hit backup catcher. Just hangs around forever. He really cannot hit still even at this time. That's just simply never going to change. One teammate makes the wisecrack that he can't hit in 7 different languages. He only has 1 season in his entire career in which he has an OPS plus above 100, 108 in 1928. And he's so good at everything else that when he puts up a 108 OPS, people give him down ballot MVP votes. Like all you needed to do to get down ballot MVP votes was be competent with a bat because of everything else you were doing. Stays with Chicago all the way until 1930, which is the same year that he gets his law degree from Columbia after passing the New York State bar exam. And he starts to practice law and gets waived by the Chicago White Sox because they don't think he's going to focus on the team. Cleveland picks him up in 1931 and then eventually drops him for the same reason. Washington in 1932 brings him onto their team. He can't hit still, but he can speak. And so in 1932, he gets picked up by a retired ball player who's doing a tour of Japan. So he goes and he plays with some colleagues in 1932, and he has an amazing time. Decides to turn this into an entire international odyssey. He goes from China to countries that do not exist anymore, like Indochina and Siam. He goes all the way to Egypt and eventually back to Germany before returning to Washington the 1933 season, very late, as always. And then in 1934, because of his success in 1932, he gets invited for a different 1934 tour of Japan.
A more compulsory one.
Well, this is 1934. He never experiences any draft MLB or other, is what I will say about Moe Berg. This is a team put together primarily by Connie Mack, and it is like an all-star squad. You've got Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Jimmy Fox, Lefty Grove, even the like one catcher who's kind of meh. He's the catcher for the Athletics. Like, of course, Connie Mack is bringing him along with him. And then there's the very late addition of this second or third string catcher, Moe Berg, which is kind of weird, but whatever. The team plays a game on November 29th, but Moe Berg is not at this game. Moe Berg instead has gone to St. Luke's Hospital. This is where the U.S. ambassador's daughter had just given birth. So Moe Berg shows up with this big bouquet of flowers. He's like, hey, I was sent to give this to the ambassador's daughter. So congratulations for the baby. He never goes to that room. She never gets that flowers. He goes up to the roof with a video camera that he hidden under his kimono. He was wearing a kimono during this entire trip, by the way. That is something several people made a point to clarify. He films 24 seconds of like shaky cam footage of the skyline and harbor area and keeps it. And we'll just put a pin in that for 1 second and come back to it later. This tour is a huge success. This is the tour that like jumpstarts Japanese baseball, basically. But Moe Berg really like does not participate on the baseball side at all. And when he returns home, he finds out he's been unconditionally released by the team that had him employed at the time, Cleveland, once again. Catches on for a little bit longer with Boston. He's there for 5 years, but never plays more than 47 games. And then he spends 2 more years with Boston as a coach afterwards, during which time does some more dorky shit. He makes 3 appearances on a radio quiz show called Information Please. And he writes this essay that gets published in The Atlantic entitled Pitchers and Catchers. Read the whole thing. It's 12 pages long. It's not bad. It's basically this general treatise on the evolution of the arts of pitching and hitting up to that point, looking at it as a psychic battle, and then at the end, kind of framing it all with the catcher's place as the final perspective. It's a nice piece of baseball writing. It is frequently cited as such to this point. He is a very good writer. But this is still not the other life that he has aside from baseball. For that, we have to get to 1941, when Japan attacks Pearl Harbor and the United States enters World War II officially. Moe Berg has continued to this point to use his Princeton man status to do like hobnobbing in high society all the time. And as a Princeton man, he is friends with one of the Rockefellers. And so when the United States enters the war, he decides to parlay his friendship with the Rockefellers into joining the Office of the Coordinator of Inter-American Affairs, basically a big bureaucracy that was overseeing all of the military and intelligence bureaucracies underneath them, so that he could get his foot in the door this way because of just an intense sense of patriotism is what's driving him. Now that he is in the government, we return to that pin from 1934. He knows that the U.S. at some point is presumably going to be doing bombing runs in Tokyo. So, like, he just seeks out an audience with intelligence personnel to bring them this shaky-ass 24 seconds of out-of-date footage. For a while, the story was like, oh, and this was used for, like, some of the 19... This is not useful to them. The skyline has changed. There are new buildings. It's not very good footage. Like, Moe Berg was not a spy in 1934 when he got this, and he didn't even do a particularly good job then. But they do see how eager he is. This hyper multilingual, charming guy. And Uncle Sam decides, all right, we are going to put him to use still. And so for 8 months, he starts out his spy experience down in the Caribbean in South America. The US is worried about fascist forces trying to like cross the ocean and get a foothold there in the Americas. But after this like 8-month period of time, the general consensus that Moe Berg and others comes to is we don't need to be worried about that. And so he wants to go to where the action is. And he transfers to Europe to join the OSS, predecessor to the CIA. And he's going to join something called the Alsos mission. The Alsos mission is the manifestation of worries that Germany was going to develop an A-bomb sooner. The name means groves in Greek, and it was under General Groves. So there was a point where this mission was going to get scuttled because, like, when the higher-ups found out, they were like, oh, that's a fucking stupid name to make this secret mission. We're going to have to, like, fire you all for doing something that's going to give it away. But they decided they put too much resources into it already. And so General Bill Donovan, who is, by the way, the former leader of the Fightin' 69th Regiment, nice, recruits Moe Berg. Under Bill Donovan, Moe Berg works with Boris Pash. And Boris Pash is very, very methodic, very, like, put-together agent, always dressed in the nines. And Moe Berg is kind of his odd couple pairing, where he's got a loose tie on, he's got real nervous energy, but it works. He's really disarming when he talks to people. He'll wow them with like his old baseball stories, and he's just very, very good at getting people to eat out of the palm of his hand. And this odd couple pairing works for the two of them. They start in Italy. Berg just gets scientists talking to him about what they're working on at bars, and they determine, okay, we don't think the Nazis are getting a lot of help down here from Italy. So they start zooming in on Germany, which is trying to make a bomb at this point. That is known, even if they are behind the US. And do you know one of the main minds behind the German A-bomb efforts?
Albert Einstein.
Not Albert Einstein. Diaz, do you want to tell me who knocks?
That would be, he has an uncertainty principle, and his name is Heisenberg.
Yes, it is Werner Heisenberg. In December of 1944, they get intel that Werner Heisenberg is going to leave Germany briefly. He's going to go to a conference in Zurich. They send Berg, who speaks German, to like listen to the lecture that he's giving and schmooze around to get chance for access, Heisenberg. Because if they think, based on what he's saying, in the lecture that he's getting close, Moe Berg has a gun to kill Werner Heisenberg and a cyanide pill for himself. He gets an invite to the dinner pre-lecture, but after it he gauges, I don't think Germany's there yet. He does not shoot and kill Werner Heisenberg. In fact, Heisenberg is captured by the Alsos team later on in May of 1945 before war's end. But, like, Moe Berg is at one point almost in a position to stop Breaking Bad from ever happening. So thankfully he didn't do that for you, Diaz. Following the war, President Truman dissolves OSS, arms the CIA, and only about 10% of the agents from the OSS are retained. So Berg does not get a job. He gets an offer of a Medal of Freedom for vague service. They can't like actually say what it's for at the time, but he turns it down. And that's kind of the last job that Moe Berg ever had. Continues to live this like playboy Princeton man lifestyle by mooching off of his brother, Samuel, for 17 years, during which time Samuel twice tries to evict him, is eventually successful, and then he just moves in with his sister Ethel for the rest of his life. Just going out to like high society clubs and living off of the stories of being the most interesting man in baseball for years and years and years. Supposedly, upon his deathbed in 1972, his very final words were, "How did the Mets do today?" And for the record, they did beat St. Louis 7-6. That was on May 29th, 1972. I want to make one confession to wrap up the story of Moe Berg. I had always vaguely known this story, and I did think that he was a spy in 1934 and was just like added by the US government in order to take video footage of Japan. You know, it would have been possible to be disappointed as I looked into Moe Berg and found out that that wasn't the case. But God, the deeper you go, the more secret lives that he lived, from his like childhood of being runt wolf, having to, you know, pretend that he never went to NYU, and then just being a fucking spy. It unraveled this bonkers story of a genius and a ball player and a spy all wrapped up in one person. And I just loved learning of the many different lives of my guy, Moe Berg.
I did delve into his Wikipedia page a little bit during your presentation, and the thing that I loved the most was, you know, basically when confronted over you're such a smart guy. Why are you wasting your time with sports? He said, I'd rather be a ball player than a Supreme Court justice. And God, if there is anybody who I can relate to more than a person who is gifted a brain that can do great things, but chooses to focus those things specifically in sports, Moe Berg and I feel the kinship.
The only problem is we do have documented history of someone doing both. Like, regardless of his politics, Byron White was a, Heisman Trophy level football player.
Hey, dude, who's the
first round
Alan
draft
Page?
pick in the NFL, played in the NFL, and then became a Supreme Court justice.
Well, we're also thinking of athletes who were also brilliant. I mean, you got Myron Rolle, played
Rhodes Scholar.
Safety at Florida State and became a Rhodes Scholar. John Urschel, Ravens legend and also mathematics legend. What other really smart people? Jim Bunning threw a perfect game for the Phillies and went on to become a senator, even though it was for the bad team.
I mean, if we're talking about the bad team, you've got your buddy that we've discussed here before from the Eagles.
True, John Runyon, Mr. 69 himself.
Nice. And we've got, I'm sure, some more nice stories ahead of us. And if they're double lives, then we've got 4 whole more lives to discuss. So we should keep this train rolling.
Diaz, take it away.
Oh, I'll take it away. It's fitting that you brought up Josie and her presentation for Paul Heyman, because I don't think there's any world that leads itself more to double lives, secret identities than professional wrestling. First of all, just inherent within it, anybody who is a professional wrestler is going to lead a double life. There's going to be your personal life, and then there's going to be your on-camera / in-ring life, the character that you portray. Because they're going to be 2 different people, and sometimes the lines between those can become blurred. But when it comes to my guy, I don't think there's any wrestler in the history of the industry who has been more flexible with the characters that he portrays. So this week, I want to talk about one of the all-time greats, and I'm honestly curious because I know my exposure to wrestling vastly exceeds both of yours. Do either of you know about Mick Foley?
Fuck yes. Okay, let's fucking go.
Mick Foley, first of all, is the man. And second of all, was born Michael Francis Foley on June 7th, 1965 in Bloomington, Indiana. Shortly after his birth, his family would move to Long Island, where he excelled in high school athletics. He was a lacrosse player, but was also a wrestler, the more traditional freestyle, real, quote unquote, I put up, wrestling.
Wrestling, not wrestling.
Exactly, real wrestling. He had a pretty notable teammate on his high school wrestling team. The King of Queens himself, Kevin James, wrestled alongside Mick Foley in high school. And, obviously Kevin James wasn't too good of an athlete. Otherwise, he would have gone into that instead of sitcoms. And Mick Foley, while a good athlete, wasn't a great athlete. So he didn't have any college scholarship offers. So he would just enroll at SUNY Cortland, one of the state universities in New York. Early into his freshman year in 1983, he decided to hitchhike his way to Madison Square Garden, which, for those unfamiliar with the geography of New York, you might think that's not that crazy of a thing. SUNY Cortland is over 200 miles from New York City. So he just decides to hitchhike one random night to go to Madison Square Garden because there's a big wrestling event going on there. His hero, Superfly Jimmy Snuka, is going to compete in a steel cage match. There's one particular spot that happens right in front of Foley. He's in the front row when Jimmy Snuka climbs to the top of the steel cage and jumps off of it to perform a flying frog splash down onto his opponent. And he cites this as the moment that he was hooked. That's what I want to do. I'm going to become a professional wrestler. He still stays enrolled at SUNY Cortland. He is also driving over 6 hours to a town called Freedom, Pennsylvania, where Dominic DiNucci has a wrestling school. So Mick Foley's life is Monday to Friday, attend classes at SUNY Cortland. When he gets out Friday, gets done with classes, he makes that 6-hour drive to Freedom, Pennsylvania. He takes classes over the weekend for the wrestling school. And then Sunday, when he's done, he drives the 6 hours back up to go back to classes.
And it's still just mostly classes for him. He's not in matches also yet at this point.
No, this is strictly learning about, obviously there is some crossover with freestyle wrestling, but so much of professional wrestling school is not just how do you do these moves, but it's how do you do these moves in a way that is safe for both you and your partner in the ring.
Safe and convincing.
Right, safe and convincing, exactly, which is like, it's a very fine line to try to toe. After a few years of those classes, in 1986, he makes his professional debut on a small local circuit in Clarksburg, West Virginia, under the name of Cactus Jack. While he's refining the Cactus Jack character, he's also getting booked in several one-off matches with WWF, the preeminent power in wrestling. But at first, he's only signing on for these one-off matches as a jobber. And for the uninitiated, a jobber is essentially a person who is being sent in, how do you say, lambs to the slaughter.
If I may steal another phrase that you've used, a tomato can.
Exactly. It is the Peter Buckley, a person who is in there explicitly to lose, to make the top-end talent look good. He wrestles under a few different names while he's doing these matches as a jobber. He wrestles as Jack Foley. He wrestles as Nick Foley. He even gets a Nick Foley, but never his real name, and he eventually returns to the independent circuit. His most successful run on the independent circuit is with the WCCW, and here he's Cactus Jack Manson. You might remember Charles Manson, you might remember the Manson family, you might remember a lot of horrible things that the Manson family did. And it's worth noting that largely just due to his hair and his beard, but Mick Foley does have there's a passing resemblance to Charles Manson. So he never really liked throwing on the Manson on the end of it, but it helps to get across the vibe of him as a wrestler, which is kind of a little bit of a sicko. Doesn't mind risking his body. He doesn't mind going through pain. He actually sometimes enjoys going through pain. And that's kind of what the Cactus Jack Manson character is all about. He enjoys time as a tag team champion and a couple runs as the light heavyweight champion with that promotion before his contract runs out, and he has a loser leaves town match, which he loses in 9 seconds. Here he gets a chance with WCW, which is the primary rival on the national wrestling scene with WWF. And at first, it's very similar to his kind of one-offs with WWF. He's just there as a jobber. He's there to make the top talent look good. He gets put in a tag match with Rick Fargo to go against the Steiner brothers. It's kind of your typical squash match. They take some bad bumps, they lose. But at the end of it, Mick has another idea. He turns on his tag partner, Rick Fargo, jumps off of the ring apron, down onto the concrete floor, and delivers a flying elbow. This kind of becomes his signature move. It's a move that, when he executes it this time, the crowd goes crazy. The people in the back go crazy. Because generally, if you're doing an elbow drop, you're going to do it down onto the mat, which is hardwood, but, is spring-loaded, takes more of a cushion. Being willing to do this move down onto the concrete earns him respect in the back, earns him respect with the fans. And for a little bit, this kind of just becomes his bit. Every week on WCW, Cactus Jack is teamed up with another inept tag team partner. And when they inevitably lose, Cactus Jack starts beating the shit out of his partner, and it ends with him doing this flying elbow drop down onto the concrete. And he just gives just this wide-eyed, psychotic stare to the camera every time when he does it. Everybody loves it. He signs a full-time contract, and he now knows this is my way into this industry. He kind of like, am I a big guy? Like, what's my role within this? Mick Foley realizes his role is just do all kinds of fucked up shit to his body and get people to keep coming. He would team up with Kevin Sullivan and Bam Bam Bigelow to form the Sullivan Slaughterhouse stable, and all of their matches are just as brutal as that name would imply. After about a 9-month run with the Slaughterhouse, he gets into an argument in real life. He has an actual dispute with Ole Anderson, who is a booker with WCW. And essentially what Ole Anderson is saying, look, you can do all this crazy sick shit that you want. If you can't actually put on a real match, you're never going to make it in this industry. So kind of takes that personally and decides not to renew his contract with WCW. He goes on a tour, again, on that independent circuit, wrestling with just various promotions. He finds his most success with the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, which was the early predecessor for ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling. He invents a match style here, which kind of becomes his calling card. The barbed wire ropes match, which is exactly what you think it is. If you've seen a wrestling ring, you've seen the ropes. It's what keeps them in the ring. Imagine if all of those were just covered in barbed wire. And so he puts on this match. It is particularly bloody. It's particularly gory. The match ends when Foley executes what's known as a hangman. We don't have to leave much of the imagination. Imagine you're going through the ropes, your head gets stuck between the top rope and the middle rope, and you're just hanging there. There's no slipping off the ropes with this. You're pretty much stuck there. But the fact that he was willing to lose a match that was so brutal like this, now getting back to the real life side of wrestling, it earns him so much respect in the locker room, and it's another thing that Mick Foley comes to be known for. He will go through all of these horrific spots, get bloodied, get beat up. He does not mind losing. Yeah. If him losing is what is best for the story, he's all for it. He's always about, if there's a young talent coming up, put him over. I mean, this makes him beloved in the locker room. After this time as a barnstormer, again, sometimes with the ECW predecessor, he also, similar to Moe Berg, did a tour in Japan, wrestling with All Japan Pro Wrestling. Eventually, he finds his way back to WCW, and he has still this Cactus Jack character, but he's going to put a little bit of a twist on it. Whereas before, Cactus Jack was kind of your classic silent psychopath, deranged but not particularly expressive. Here he is now much more gleeful and excited to inflict pain on people. He has a 2 out of 3 falls match with Sting, one of the most well-known wrestlers of all time, which he loses, but in having this match with the top flight talent, but also very technical, he shows the kind of leaps that he's taken as a wrestler. He's taken that criticism to heart, and this allows him to fly up the card and become a main eventer. He has his most notable feud while in WCW with Big Van Vader. And the thing to know about Big Van Vader is he has a reputation in the locker room as somebody that people don't want to work with. And you hear this criticism, too, of a wrestler like Goldberg, where the physical spots, there are ways to do them to make them look good and keep people safe. And there are ways to do them where you just hit the guy as hard as you fucking can. And who cares? You know, it's wrestling. Get over it. Big Van Vader is one of those more stiff wrestlers. And Mick Foley almost took it as a challenge of like, you guys don't want to do a program with them. I'll do a program with them. They have some of the most barbaric matches of all time in wrestling. One of their first matches, Mick Foley gets body slammed onto the concrete outside the ring, suffers a real-life concussion, and has to spend some time away from WCW because of that. When he comes back, he challenges Big Van Vader to a Texas death match. It's essentially a last man standing with all kinds of barbed wire and all this fun stuff included.
The barbed wire is the Texas element?
A little bit of that. And then also, you know, we have cattle prods, stun guns. Mick Foley literally gets hit with a stun gun by one of Big Van Vader's accomplices. And that is what knocks him unconscious and allows Big Van Vader to end the match. Commentary was literally silent for like the entire second half of it, just in awe of what these two are doing to each other. And afterwards, WCW was still trying to be a little more family friendly than this type of match. So they said, that's it. These two are not wrestling on a pay-per-view again. The key caveat there, though, is pay-per-view. It says nothing of any dark matches, a dark match being one that is not aired. There's one such dark match in Germany that I'm going to put a little bit of a trigger warning here for injury to limbs. We'll put it that way.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll try to read your lips.
Listener, you can join
happens.
Xavier if you want at the time that editor me will say now. 56 minutes and 27 seconds. Go ahead, Diaz.
So there's a tour of Germany that WCW is putting on. I mentioned that hangman move earlier. There's no barbed wire this time, but Mick Foley again is executing a hangman, and something that I guess was lost in translation, the ropes were done much tighter in Germany, kind of like how they would be for a boxing match, as opposed to with a wrestling match, they're supposed to have a little more give. So Mick Foley's head gets stuck in this hangman. Big Van Vader is doing the typical thing of like trying to like knock him off, knock him loose to get it out, but like the ropes just aren't giving. Finally, when they do give, Mick Foley suffers severe cuts behind both of his ears. And when they go for the tie-up afterwards, and, the classic tie-up is, they both kind of grab each other by their heads. Big Van Vader grabs him by his ear and gives a good old rip. And the top half of the ear comes off clean. Big Van Vader, kind of doesn't even realize what he's just done. He kind of just whatever, drops the ear to the ring mat. Also, we're in Europe, right? So the referee is French, doesn't speak any English. He's kind of just going with the show. He picks up the ear off of the canvas and hands it to the ring announcers. You do something with this. They have the rest of the match. Big Van Vader wins. And eventually when Foley comes off, he realizes oh shit, that wasn't just a lot of blood. That's my ear.
Can I have that back?
So they rush him to the hospital. But here's the problem. Once he gets to the hospital, they don't have the ear.
I was right to ask that. They didn't think to.
Sting realizes this about 10 minutes after the ambulance leaves, grabs the ear, flags down a cab driver, and the cab driver takes him to the hospital. When he gets there, he's trying to explain to the reception staff, look, there's a guy that came in here. He doesn't have an ear. I have the ear. Can I give this to you? But all the German reception staff sees is this man in a neon leotard with his face painted, speaking maniacally in a language they don't quite understand, and he's holding an ear. So they just call the cops, and the cops come and arrest Sting. Eventually, through translation, everything is explained. The ear is given back to the doctors. The ear is sewn back on. Mick Foley gets his ear back.
Would you guys get arrested by foreign police to bring me back my own ear if we were in Germany or Italy or Portugal and somehow I lost an ear?
Ear no, nose yes.
Yeah, ear, they gotta have some pretty good prosthetics for ears at this point.
You can get a better ear.
We can rebuild him. But so that's kind of the most brutal part of their feud. But almost a year after the original match that started their whole feud, they wrestle again, and they repeat that same spot of the body slam onto concrete. Mick Foley agrees to this. This isn't an unplanned thing. He's it'd be sick if we end our feud the same way we started it. But he's upset because the commentary kind of seems like they don't even realize that that's what they're doing. They don't pick up on that angle. Also, he feuded with the bookers, the people that ultimately sign off on the storylines, because he wanted to do a whole program about how Big Van Vader ripped his ear off. And they were like, listen, buddy, we're just glad that didn't happen in front of cameras. No, we're not doing that. We're going to pretend it didn't happen. So he chooses not to renew his contract with WCW. And if he is feeling that he cannot be his full Cactus Jack self, where better to go than the newly formed ECW. And it's a match made in heaven. At this point, he's already known as the king of hardcore wrestling nationally. And he's now in the promotion that calls for exactly this kind of match all the time. He spends a year competing for the heavyweight title, but once he actually gets in there, things are a little different than he thought it would be. He feuds with Sandman, who is the heavyweight champion for ECW, but whereas Mick Foley is somebody who is very concerned with putting on a good match, being in the best state of mind to do it. The Sandman's character is to drink a lot of beer and smoke a lot of cigarettes, and also the real life person who portrays the Sandman drinks a lot of beer and is kind of never really there for their matches, which, if you're doing all this fucked up shit to your body, some people want to get fucked up to do that. I do understand that. But Mick Foley kind of doesn't jive with that. He also kind of doesn't jive with the ECW crowd. He loves doing all this crazy stuff, but it's almost more like a circus to the fans, it seems like. There was one spot where a newer wrestler messed up a spot and banged his head and quite visibly started swelling up and wasn't doing well. And the whole crowd was chanting at him, "You fucked up. You fucked up." And Mick Foley's kind of listen, we're out here sacrificing our bodies and you're embarrassing this guy because he made a mistake. So Cactus Jack, who comes in as a face, obviously the king of hardcore, then turns heel and he starts cutting into the fans with real anger, breaking kayfabe, ranting at these fans about how they don't appreciate what these guys are putting themselves through. Starts praising WWF and WCW in his promos, which obviously isn't currying him any favors with the ECW execs. Also a good way to get cheap heat. And Cactus Jack goes from being this king of hardcore wrestling, to deliberately doing like just the most slow technical matches that you can ever imagine. Eventually, word gets out that he's going to sign with WWF. He gets heckled during all of his matches with "you sold out" chants, which a little fair. You're going to the big bad. But in his final match with ECW, the fans recognized everything that he had done. He gets a standing ovation. He's carried out of the ring on the backs of his fellow wrestlers to Frank Sinatra's New York, New York. Mick Foley still cites this as the happiest he ever was in the wrestling ring, was being carried off on the shoulders and having the fans recognize what he had truly contributed.
I gotta say, that's a pretty bad omen to say right before he starts his new career at WWF, that when he leaves this one, is the happiest he ever was in wrestling.
Some moments to come, and he may or may not have complete memory of all of them, but we'll get into that. But first of all, when he first lands in WWF, Vince McMahon wants to make him into a new character. Respects all the things that Mick Foley can do, but Cactus Jack, this character, isn't quite what he's looking for. He wants something a little more twisted, a little more demented. So he comes up with the gimmick of a masked maniac. They go back and forth on several different names for him. But finally, it's Foley's suggestion of Mankind that lands. And so Cactus Jack is no more. Now we have Mankind. And the difference between Mankind and Cactus Jack is like Cactus Jack is a real life psychopath, like somebody that you could believe. Mankind is a much more surreal portrayal that's kind of like a cross between like a recluse and a demon. Mankind is purported to lurk in the boiler rooms of arenas. He would cry out for his mommy while he was in the ring and would engage in all kinds of masochism in the ring. Sometimes it's just ripping his hair out.
I always took it very much as a play off Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Leatherface. Like, that feels like the most direct one-to-one analog that you have for Mankind in pre-existing IP.
Yeah, a sick fuck, as it were. And Mick Foley, in this new character for the first time, went full method. When WWE gets to a new town, everybody else checks in the hotel. He sets up a mattress in the boiler room of the arena and sleeps there. Sometimes he sleeps under the ring, really committing to this character as much as possible.
Daniel Day-Lewis, eat your heart out.
His first major feud is with The Undertaker. The Undertaker's father is Paul Bearer, and Paul Bearer loomed large over the feud. There was one match in particular where the winner would be the one who claimed the urn from Paul Bearer. And it seemed that The Undertaker had beaten Mankind. Paul Bearer would not give the urn to The Undertaker. He actually hits The Undertaker over the head with the urn and then hands it to Mankind. And so Mankind, as this monstrous villain, the dead man's father, has now turned to Mankind as the true epitome of evil and darkness. Their feud goes on for a while more. Eventually, The Undertaker is the dominant force, wins all of the matches. Eventually, kind of kills Paul Bearer. It's left ambiguous, but Paul Bearer goes away for a while. And so that feud ends. Shortly thereafter, there's kind of these questions about what do we do next with the Mankind character. And Mankind starts to do a series of interviews with Jim Ross, the announcer, the commentator for WWF. But in these interviews, Mankind does not present himself as Mankind. He instead presents himself as Dude Love, who is a free-spirited hippie character. And while every time that Mankind comes out to wrestle, he is still Mankind, he's still in his full getup. Anytime that he gives an interview, he is Dude Love.
I feel like I need your notes now, Diaz, to follow the number of names. This might be why I never got into wrestling. Too many names, and I feel like I need a spreadsheet to remember everything.
Well, I mean, there is a lot going on, and I will say for the most part, it's very rare that a wrestler will completely change characters as often as Mick Foley does. But we go from Cactus Jack, Mankind, now Dude Love is showing up in these interviews, but it's still Mankind every time he actually gets in the ring.
Before you started talking about Mick Foley, that's the only one I knew. Mankind. That the other ones I was like, wait, I didn't know this. Was I thinking about the wrong person?
No, he is an enigma unto himself. The interviews as Dude Love increase the kind of mystique around Mankind and also just increase fan interest. And what was once a heel, now the Dude Love interviews are kind of adding some color to the character. And now people are starting to cheer for Mankind. Dude Love does make his in-ring debut when Stone Cold Steve Austin needed a partner to fight for the tag team titles, and out comes Dude Love to make his in-ring debut. They win the titles, so they become tag team champions, but shortly thereafter, Steve Austin suffers a real-life injury that causes them to vacate the titles. And Dude Love would begin a feud with Triple H. Before a pay-per-view match, a segment aired in which Dude Love and Mankind get into an argument over who gets to go out and fight Triple H. It's Mick Foley with the mask on arguing, and then it cuts to him as Dude Love with the hippie aesthetic arguing back and forth. Who gets to fight Triple H in this match? Will it be Mankind? Will it be Dude Love? And then finally, they both realize there's only one person that can go out into the ring. It's Cactus Jack. So Cactus Jack makes his WWF debut on pay-per-view against Triple H.
This is legitimate. Like, again, I have a much more limited knowledge than Diaz, but this is, as far as I'm concerned, the peak of wrestling culture.
A man arguing with himself, and we're going to get more absurd.
I was picturing Two-Face from Batman in the hospital room, and then a third face somehow appears and starts arguing with the first two faces.
That's basically what it is. But they both realize, like, we are both the children of Cactus Jack. Cactus Jack came before us. It's time for Cactus Jack to get back in the ring. So Cactus Jack makes his WWF debut and defeats Triple H. And this is just ahead of the 1998 Royal Rumble. And that leads to a lot of confusion. And this is kind of played up on Monday Night Raw and everything leading up. What exactly do we call Mick Foley now? Who is he? Which character is he going to be going forward? Nobody knows. But kind of everybody just assumes it's going to be Cactus Jack. And so when the Royal Rumble starts, and again, for the unfamiliar, the way the Royal Rumble works, there's 30 participants. There's one in the ring to start. Every minute, another participant comes out. And the last person that is standing in the ring without having been thrown over the top rope, that's the person that wins the Royal Rumble. And when the first participant is named, it is Cactus Jack who comes out, but shortly thereafter gets eliminated. So, okay, early night for Cactus Jack. Number 16 is announced, and out comes Mankind to make his triumphant return to the ring. Mankind gets eliminated. And so we're okay, that was a fun little thing, but surely there will not be another appearance until number 28 out of 30. Out comes Dude Love. Mick Foley is the first person to appear in the same Royal Rumble, not only as two characters, but as three characters.
Peak of wrestling culture.
And now, I mean, there's only even more questions after this. Who is this guy? Who is he going to be? It is just Cactus Jack who appears on television again. There is no explanation of what happened to Mankind. There is no explanation of what happened to Dude Love. It's just Cactus Jack. Cactus Jack gets his feelings hurt pretty bad, though, soon thereafter, because he's wrestling against Terry Funk in a hardcore match. And it's particularly gruesome, but the fans seem to be losing interest. And about a minute before their match is set to end, fans are starting to leave when the announcer makes an announcement like, hey, stick around because Stone Cold's coming out after this match. And the whole crowd goes crazy right away and runs back to their seats. Cactus Jack really takes this to heart and announces on the next television event, you guys don't appreciate me. That's it. I'm leaving. I'm retiring from WWF. The following week, on Monday Night Raw, Vince McMahon tells Stone Cold that he's going to have to defend his title tonight against a secret opponent. Stone Cold's in the ring, waiting to find out who it is. And out comes Dude Love to fight for the WWF title. The match ends in DQ, which technically meant that Dude Love won, but you cannot lose the title on a disqualification. So it's what's known as a dirty finish, an unclean finish, something that leaves the fans unhappy. And Vince McMahon, Mr. McMahon as the character, is deeply unsatisfied with this. He calls Dude Love into the ring and says, you cannot be Dude Love anymore. You are only Mick Foley. You need to earn back the Dude Love moniker by having another hardcore match with Terry Funk. So now for the first time in WWF, Mick Foley is wrestling as Mick Foley for the right to be Dude Love again. He wins this match. He is allowed to be Dude Love again. Mr. McMahon brings out the Dude Love costume and hands it to Mick Foley. the title match is named. It's going to be Dude Love against Stone Cold Steve Austin for the WWF Championship. We've already seen Cactus Jack get kicked out for losing a title match. When Dude Love loses this title match, Dude Love is now fired from WWF, never to return again. About an hour later in the same episode, The Undertaker is in the ring. When hit that music, Mankind is making his return to the WWF ring, and he's going to have a good old feud with The Undertaker. Now, if you were waiting for this in the first mention of the Mankind-Undertaker feud, now we're going to get to perhaps the most infamous match in wrestling history. Mankind against The Undertaker at a Hell in a Cell match. And what distinguishes the Hell in a Cell from a steel cage match, in the Hell in a Cell, it is also enclosed at the top. In a steel cage match, you can climb to the top, get out that way, and you can win the match. In the Hell in a Cell, there is no escape. The first insane spot in this match. Undertaker and Mankind make it to the top of the Hell in a Cell. And they're kind of teetering close to the edge. And this has never been done before in WWF. And people are kind of wondering, there's no way, right? This isn't about to happen, right? The Undertaker throws Mankind off the top of this Hell in a Cell. It's about 25 feet up in the air. Like, it is a very high distance for a near 300-pound man to fall. And he throws him off the steel cage. He goes down through the Spanish announce table. And we get the most iconic Jim Ross call of all time. He's down for about 5 to 10 minutes. And like, it's a very legitimate thing where people are like, refs are coming to look at him. Dude, are you actually still alive? Are you still okay? But Mankind staggers back to his feet. The match resumes. More choke slams, more body slams in the ring. And eventually, they find their way back up to the top again. And there's no fucking way they're going to do this again, right? I need to emphasize, this spot is supposed to just be a choke slam onto the top of the Hell in a Cell, and it's supposed to just stay on the roof. The problem, though, that they didn't consider when doing this is that the force that will be generated by a 300-pound man being body slammed down through the top of a Hell in a Cell, it might cause that cage to give way. And so Mankind goes flying through the top of the Hell in a Cell and falls down to the mat. Another like 10 to 15 foot fall. That the whole thing is like the tables are designed in a way to absorb the blow, cushion it, and then give when you fall down to the ground. This is a legitimate 15-foot fall down to the mat. There is no give. At this point, Jim Ross is now legitimately asking, will somebody stop the damn match? Like, really pleading for Mick Foley's life. Luckily for Mick Foley's life, and though he does not remember the rest of this match after that. No memory of the rest of this match, but he is able to perform and finish the match. The Undertaker wins. And at this point, the fans now have no choice. Like, you know the phrase, we have no choice but to stand. The wrestling fan community as a whole has just seen this man do the two single most insane stunts that have ever been done in pro wrestling in the same half-hour match. They have no choice but to stand, and now Mankind is beloved. But it's a little weird if the fans just love this weird demon-like character. So, in turn, sometimes the fans follow the program and sometimes the program follows the fans. This is an instance where the program is going to follow the fans, and Mankind becomes much less of a demon spawn, what the hell is this, and becomes more of just kind of a big, lovable oaf. It's a big, dumb, stupid guy. One of the things that this big, dumb, stupid guy tries to do is he tries to befriend Mr. McMahon. You know, Mr. McMahon wants none of it. There's one time where he accidentally hospitalizes Mr. McMahon, and then he tries to bring a clown. It goes horribly awry. Mr. McMahon is only more upset with Mankind. There's one thing he does, and it's supposed to be just a one-off bit, but in trying to cheer up Mr. McMahon, he takes off his boot, he takes off his horrifically disgusting, vile, sweaty sock, and makes a sock puppet and gets real close to Mr. McMahon's face and is speaking in a high-pitched voice like this. Oh, Mr. McMahon, you're going to be better soon. And Mr. McMahon fucking hates this, but the fans love it because the most important thing to know about wrestling fans is they fucking love weird shit like this. Once demon character now has a sock puppet that he calls Mr. Socko. We are all in on this. And so now not only is Mankind over, Mr. Socko is immensely popular. So much so that Mankind's finishing move goes from being the mandible claw, in which you shove your hand into the mouth of your opponent. And this is a real life thing. There are apparently 2 pressure points under the tongue that will cause the entire mouth to go numb, eventually will cause the entire head to go numb, and you will pass out.
Jeez.
He does this same move, but now with Mr. Socko on. You know, a sweat-drenched, disgusting sock. It seems that Mr. Socko is actually winning over Mr. McMahon as well as time goes by. He arranges a King of the Ring tournament in which several matches are kind of rigged for Mankind. And it ends in Mankind versus The Rock for the WWF title. Looks like Mick Foley might win. But at the last moment, The Rock reverses and puts him in a sharpshooter, which is the same move that was used in the Montreal Screwjob. Bret Hart at home in Calgary as the WWF champion. Shawn Michaels put his move on him, the sharpshooter, and Vince McMahon came out in real life and called for the bell, even though Bret Hart did not tap. 100% broke kayfabe. It was a legitimate screwing of Bret Hart. In a callback to that incident, this was planned, where now Vince McMahon came out again, calls for the bell. The Rock, who was incredibly over as a face, immediately becomes a heel and aligns with Mr. McMahon's new stable, the Corporation. Mankind becomes the face of the resistance against the Corporation and begins a months-long feud with them. He has a title match with The Rock at In Your House, one of their pay-per-views. Mankind uses Mr. Socko on The Rock. The Rock passes out, and Mankind becomes, for the first time in his career, world champion. However, Mr. McMahon comes out and says, Mankind said he would make him tap out. He did not tap out. I am invalidating this result. The Rock is still champion. He gets another title shot on a taped episode of Monday Night Raw. It's a no DQ match, which means anybody can get involved. Anything can happen. The only thing that ends this match is that one man pins the other. Anytime you get a match like this in a championship match, you're going to have all kinds of shenanigans. There's going to be all kinds of people coming in trying to get involved. People get involved to try to take out Mick Foley on The Rock's behalf, on Mr. McMahon's behalf. Eventually, the wrestlers start coming from the back, the locker room. All these people who love Mick Foley and love Mankind are trying to get involved. And it looks like The Rock is going to do it again. Mr. McMahon is ringside. He's going to screw him over. Out comes Stone Cold Steve Austin, making his triumphant return from his injury. And he wants to help his former tag team partner. He brings out a steel chair, hits The Rock over the head with it. Mick Foley is passed out on the ground, but Stone Cold drags him on top of The Rock. The ref suddenly becomes aware of what's happening in the ring. 1, 2, 3, ring the bell. And for the first time ever, Mankind, Mick Foley, is a world champion. And the crowd goes absolutely nuts. The whole back comes out to celebrate with Mick Foley. It is a true Rocky moment. It's a true Rudy moment because this guy who has made an entire career out of beating the shit out of himself to put other people over, to make other people look good, finally gets to claim the title. Between WWF, Monday Night Raw, WCW, they had their program Nitro. These were the 2 top wrestling programs going head to head on Monday night. And they went back and forth for a few years over which was getting better ratings. I mentioned this was a taped episode of Monday Night Raw. Meanwhile, WCW Nitro is live. While live on the air, Nitro spoils what's about to happen on WWF. And they say, oh, well, in about 15 minutes over on Raw, Mankind's going to beat The Rock and win the WWF title. And Eric Bischoff sarcastically says, I'm sure people are going to flip over for that one. It is perhaps the biggest own goal in TV history. Because as soon as people hear that Mankind is going to get to finally win the title, everybody flips over. Raw crushes Nitro in the ratings that night. And never again would Nitro outdraw Monday Night Raw. It eventually led to the dissolution of WCW and its acquisition by WWF. But The fact that everybody goes over, even though knowing what happened, that just kind of speaks to how beloved Mankind Mick Foley is within the wrestling community. But back into WWF, the feud continues, and they have an I Quit match at the next pay-per-view, which is exactly what you think it is if you've never heard of it. The first person to say I quit loses. That is the only way that this match is allowed to end. Mick Foley is knocked unconscious by 15 consecutive headshots to the head with a steel chair by The Rock. And the match ends when Shane McMahon, Mr. McMahon's son, comes out with a tape recording of Mick Foley saying I quit from a previous interview, saying, "You'll never get me to say I quit." They just clipped the I quit. The ref is successfully duped and proclaims The Rock the winner again. Mankind does regain his title at one of the most unique incidents in wrestling history, something they did once and never did again. They put on a championship match during halftime of Super Bowl 33. It's an empty arena, but they told everybody what was going to happen. Just, hey, when the big game hits halftime, flip over to us. We're going to have a championship match. It was a no-holds-barred, falls count anywhere match. So, it's some of it's in the ring, some of it's in the empty stands. Eventually, they make themselves back into what kind of looks like a construction site. Mankind again uses Mr. Sacco to make The Rock pass out. While he is passed out, he drives over a forklift, lowers the forklift down onto The Rock's body, and then stands on top of the forklift. The ref counts 1, 2, 3. Mankind regains his title. Eventually, we all know who The Rock is. The Rock wins the title. The Rock goes on for a long title reign. The two do have a little Apollo Creed, Rocky Balboa moment. After The Rock lost his title, they would tag up to form the Rock and Sock team, and they would win the tag team titles together. Largely, this does it for Mankind's time as a top wrestler in WWE. All these years of doing all these brutal matches is starting to break him down. They do convince him to come back for WrestleMania, where he loses to Chris Jericho. He comes back as commissioner thereafter, which is largely just an onstage character, not actually making any real decisions. He does come back for sporadic matches here and there. The most noteworthy one is in 2005, there's a young up-and-coming wrestler by the name of Randy Orton, who has a bit of reputation as a pretty boy, doesn't do the dirty work, didn't earn these opportunities because his father, Bob Orton, is very well known in wrestling. Mankind actually came up wrestling against Bob Orton. But just as he had throughout his whole career, Mick Foley recognized an opportunity to help another young wrestler get over. So he does a hardcore match with Randy Orton. Randy Orton bleeds for the first time in the ring. He bleeds a lot. He bleeds from a barbed wire bat. All kinds of horrifying things. But Randy Orton proves himself, again, not just to the wrestlers in the back, but to the fans. You can fake the punches. You can fake the kicks. You cannot fake barbed wire causing you to bleed. That's his last big match in WWE. He does come back for some sort of smaller matches here and there. But that match with Randy Orton was really his big send-off. Not just him getting to come back and have one last great match, but in so doing, once again, taking the loss and putting over Randy Orton. In 2013, he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, us being a very clearly bleeding heart podcast, Mick Foley, a longtime donor to Democratic campaigns, endorsed Barack Obama for president in 2008. He was an early advocate for women's wrestling on its own merits, not just being, hey, let's put two girls and, hey, girls fighting. That's hot. He was one of the first ones to say it can be more than that. These women deserve to be taken seriously as wrestlers. Does a lot with the Make-A-Wish Foundation as well. And just one other fun thing. In 2004, ahead of the Bush-Gore election, WWF put on a debate of its own. But it was between Mick Foley, representing the Democratic side, and JBL, representing the Republican side. And a truly absurd thing to think that they put that on, but Mick Foley fighting the good fight in spite of wrestling for the company that falls under the McMahon name. Always fighting the good fight. Always sticking up for the little guy. Almost anybody that wrestled with him loves him. Because of, again, not just the stuff that he put his body through, but the fact that he's willing to do that in service of making other wrestlers look so much better. wrestling is a sport or an entertainment avenue, however you want to call it, that has the kind of characters that can only exist in wrestling, right? But I would put forth that there is no character more unique, more pliable, and more willing to be unique and pliable for the betterment of the group, not just himself, than Mick Foley, my guy this week.
He is a guy that lifts other guys up. I mean, honestly, Diaz, the question is whether he is going to be able to shake his status as jobber and not accidentally put one of the other two guys discussed today. Of course, there is still a third guy and two more lives to discuss. Xavier, why don't you lay that last one on me?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be difficult to follow up. There's going to be less wrestling in my presentation, and less
you say
gore.
less, but not zero.
And less gore as well.
But not zero.
It should be, I'm not going to say it's more family friendly, but it's less graphic. But I'll take a shot at it. We've talked figure skating before. You know, we have Guy Tara Lipinski in the hall. And to be honest, there's a lot during that period of figure skating, the early to mid 90s, that is just a hotbed of interesting material. For this specific topic, there was another guy that's essentially like a stablemate of Tara Lipinski. Today I want to talk about Nicole Bobek.
I apologize that I'm not as familiar with her game as I am Mick Foley's, but I'm excited.
Hey, that I like that better, even if it is technically kind of against what we thought of when we were starting this podcast many years ago. So Nicole Bobek, she's a Chicagoan, born August 23rd, 1977. She never met her father, who was apparently a balloon vendor in Chicago's Lincoln Park. And she was instead raised by her mother, Jana, who had allegedly been a Czech figure skater and model back in Czechoslovakia before immigrating to the U.S., but at this time ran an ice cream stand in Lincoln Park alongside her partner, Joyce Barron. And I need to editorialize a little bit here. When I first read this, I thought, okay, obviously that's her romantic partner, but it was the late 90s, early 2000s. They couldn't just say that. But after reading other stories about Jana, I'm honestly not sure. There were different reports that went life partner or her dear friend, which is very coded language, but I don't know for sure because Jana has now recently gotten remarried to a man, or married for the first time, I should say, to a man. So I don't know for sure, but it was a weird situation growing up for Nicole.
The implication.
Yeah, some reports even say that she believed that Barron was her aunt growing up and actually ran away from home at one point when she learned that she wasn't. So it's a weird situation. But enough of that. Nicole started skating when she was 3. When she was 4, she actually got some local notoriety because she was a strawberry shortcake in the Evanston Ice Festival up by Northwestern. By the time she was 9, her mom thought, okay, this is something that, you know, maybe she can do professionally or, you know, at a high level. And so she moved herself and Nicole to California to try to get more professional coaches for Nicole. They go through a lot of coaches. Like high-level athletes, especially in figure skating, will go through a couple coaches. With Nicole, it's a lot, and a lot of that is kind of pinned on Jana. There's plenty of articles and sources talking about how she wanted the coaches to focus solely on Nicole, but even high-level, like world-class coaches, they're going to have like 2 or 3 skaters that they're training at one time, like if not more. So it was pretty much an impossible ask, and so they just keep switching around and swapping coaches pretty often. When she was 11, she starts training with a man named Carlo Fassi, an Italian figure skater and one of the top-ranked coaches in the world. Training under Fassi, she ends up getting the novice-level silver medal at the 1989 U.S. Championships, so essentially youth silver medal for the U.S. Championships. A 1990 article from the Chicago Tribune spoke about the difficulties for the Bobek family in affording the high cost of figure skating. Again, remember, her mom works as an ice cream vendor. They don't have a lot of money. And they rely on outside support, such as there's a local dressmaker who donated all of Nicole's outfits for when she was figure skating. At one point, she skates at the U.S. Olympic Festival in Minneapolis, and George Steinbrenner was watching her and just cut a $15,000 check to try to sponsor her. Like a weird mashup there.
If George Steinbrenner was still here, you wouldn't be worried about Juan Soto leaving this offseason. He's not going to. But, like, that is just the clear proof of it.
We'll see what happens. That's not.
He's signing with New York. Let's continue.
That's neither here nor there. So, in 1990, a 13-year-old Nicole competes at her first big international tournament, the 1991 World Junior Championships in Budapest. That is not a misprint. The championships are based on the season and not the actual year. So, they're held 1 year before the year that they're stated. So, the 1991 championships are in 1990. I think that's stupid, but, you know, who am I to...
It's Madden rules.
Yeah, it's Madden rules, I guess. That's a good way to look at it. She finishes fourth in the World Juniors, one spot off the podium, which is pretty good for her first attempt. After the season, her coach, Fassi, leaves America to return home to Milan. He had been in America for about 30 years at this point, because in 1961, the entire U.S. figure skating team died in a plane crash. And so coaches from all over the world moved to kind of take up the void. And so him and his wife had moved to America and just kind of settled there, but did want to go home. So they finally left to go back to Italy when he got a job in Milan. And he actually wanted Nicole to come with him. He said because of her mom, she could come to Europe and represent Czechoslovakia. And it would actually be good for her in that Czechoslovakia did not have a lot of good skaters, especially compared to the U.S., and she would be guaranteed a spot in the 92 Olympics if she wanted to. So he tries to convince her to come, but she refuses. She said, quote, "I was born in the United States, and this is the country I should represent. You know, we have another patriot here." A 13-year-old passing up a spot at the Olympics takes some level of courage to do, but she does that, she passes it up, and so she stays in America, but she needs a new coach. This is like her seventh coach at this point, and she still does well. She gets to go back to the World Juniors, but this time she finishes 16th, much worse than the last time. During this same time, she starts competing in the U.S. like senior national championships, finishes 8th in 91, 7th in 92, 5th in 93. And then in January of 94, she finally makes her breakthrough at a senior championship, where she finishes on the podium of the U.S. championships, getting third behind Tanya Harding and Michelle Kwan.
I was just thinking that there are some shades of Tanya Harding with the like overbearing mother in this story.
Yeah, and you know this podium finish is aided by the fact that the Tanya Harding-Nancy Kerrigan incident happens this week, and it keeps Nancy Kerrigan from competing, meaning that she was the third best skater essentially by default. Unfortunately for her, Harding and Kerrigan still get the 94 Olympic spots, and there were only 2 spots at this point. So she doesn't get to go to the Olympics, neither does Michelle Kwan. But both Harding and Kerrigan pull out of the 94 World Championships, which was held a month after. So it's January U.S. Championships, February Olympics, March World Championships. So Kwan and Bobek get to go to the World Championships in Chiba, Japan. Neither do well. Nothing of note happens, but still great experience to have your first like senior level major international tournament. Especially, you know, at such a young age, still only 16. Later, 94, still looking for a real permanent coach, she moves to Detroit to work with Richard Callahan, who was the coach of Tara Lipinski. In November of this year, she gets bit in the neck by a giant dog and suffers a deep puncture wound to the neck. When she recovered, she joked that she'd been attacked by Brad Pitt, because the movie Interview with a Vampire had just come out like 2 weeks beforehand. So I guess if you're going to get bit in the neck and make it look like a vampire, have it happen the same time, probably the best vampire movie of the past 30 years comes out, so you can make some good jokes about it.
It's a strong choice. Interesting.
What, my feelings on vampire movies?
I am surprised that's the number one, yes.
I mean, I like Interview with the Vampire a lot. Like, I think it eschews the regular vampire movie type formula. Like, I could think of a lot of good ones. Like, Daybreakers I like a lot because it's so weird. I don't like the regular, I'm a vampire and I'm going to suck your blood type thing. I like it when they're a little different. Dracula is fine, but I like those ones. But
I'm just saying Blade Trinity is right there for you.
I don't consider... Okay, I did watch Blade the other day.
I'm joking about... Please don't defend Blade Trinity. I was joking about that part. The first two Blades are fine.
I literally watched Blade Trinity the other day. I bought it on Amazon and watched it because I love Ryan Reynolds in that movie and how that was the inspiration for Deadpool. Deadpool does not happen without Blade Trinity. James, I like stupid action movies. But
but the first two are also good.
Yes, I like them all, but when I think of vampire movies, I think the main character is a vampire, and not vampires. Blade is a daywalker. He is not a vampire. He is half.
What would you describe a daywalker as? Would you say it's a kind of vampire?
No, he is half vampire. It is a different thing, and he hunts vampires.
We're getting so far off the point. Nicole Bobek is not a vampire. Last I checked,
Nicole Bobek is not a vampire. So let's get back to this. I might go watch this movie again because it's a good movie. All right. 95 ends up being Bobek's best season. At the U.S. Championships in Providence in February, she outduels Michelle Kwan. That is not an easy thing to do at this point. She wins the free skate, and she gets second in the short program, which earns her first senior gold medal. And the wider figure skating audience was kind of shocked at this because, like I said, she switches coaches all the time and was she's an inconsistent skater. So Michelle Kwan, golden child, how could she lose to Nicole Bobek? But this is good for Bobek, and with this gold, she gets another shot at the World Championships. This time they're in Birmingham in the UK in March, and she does way better. First day is the short program. She finishes first. The Chicago Tribune wrote that she mastered all of the elements, 4 jumps, spins, footwork, and her mesmerizing spirals, at a tempo unmatched by any of the 30 other skaters. Fosse, who wasn't even her coach at this point, said, Nicole is fantastic. When she is on, she has the sparkle. She is a natural. Nothing is studied. She has it, and the others don't have it. High praise from a world-renowned coach who was coaching other skaters at this competition and not Nicole. The free skate is not quite as good. She finishes 4th in it, which was enough for her to get a silver. Unfortunately, because of a weird quirk in the ranked choice scoring system, which was unique at this championships, Michelle Kwan's free skate caused something that a statistics book was written about with this as an example of the irrelevant independent alternative having an effect it should not in a fair voting system. Bobek and Surya Bonali, who was 3rd, their scores stay the same, but Kwan's ranked choice score causes Bonali and Bobek to flip in the final standings, even though the actual scores were that Bobek was better than Bonali. That leads to Bobek getting the bronze, even though she scored higher than Surya Bonali in silver, which obviously that shouldn't happen, and the International Skating Union changed their scoring system because of it. But that's still too late to do anything for Nicole Bobek, who gets a bronze when she had the second highest score in the tournament.
Is technically correct 3rd place champion the best kind of 3rd place champion?
Ooh, it's a fair
question.
If Futurama existed at this point in 1995, maybe that would have made Nicole Bobek feel a little bit better about this travesty. She gets injured a bunch over the next couple seasons, and during this time she does go back to working with Carlo Fassi, and after recovering, she skates well enough to get another bronze at the 1997 U.S. Championships in Nashville. Like you said, we love our 3rd place championships. This sends her back to the World Championships in Lausanne, Switzerland, alongside Michelle Kwan and Tara Lipinski. Unfortunately, Fassi suffers a heart attack during the competition and dies. A clearly devastated Bobek struggled to a 13th place finish, understandable, while Lipinski and Kwan go 1-2. The day after, she said, quote, I know he is here with all of us, but we just can't see him. He was always here for me. He always cared. He took the place of a father for me. And that's important. In a lot of different interviews over the years, she talked about how the fact that she never had a father, like Fassi was the closest thing to one she ever had, and that's why they always went back to working together. Imagine, trying to compete as a teenager at a world championships and your father figure dies next to you there. Brutal, brutal timing and terrible for young Nicole. After this, she gets coached by his widow, Krista, for a little while and gets another bronze at the 98 U.S. Championships in Philly, behind Lipinski and Kwan, yet again. This time, her third place finish is enough to get her to the 98 Olympics in Nagano, her first Olympics. Like we said before, she could have had the 92 Olympics if she decided to compete for Czechoslovakia, but didn't. And coming up in the same time as Tanya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan, Tara Lipinski, and Michelle Kwan, spots on these rosters are very tough to break in, even if you finish third at pretty much everything. But she gets the third spot in the lead up to the Olympics. Lipinski and Kwan are the golden girls of the entire U.S. Olympics team, so they get a ton of sponsorship opportunities. And by default, they have to put the other ladies figure skater in these two. So they're in Panasonic commercials. There's a Campbell's soup commercial where they're on the ice and eating the soup, and the soup is so warm it melts the ice where they're just standing in water. She's clearly the third person in this where they really wanted Kwan and Lipinski, but it's still nice to be included. Unfortunately, in the lead up to the Olympics, she suffers a pretty bad hip injury. She's still able to compete, but while Lipinski and Kwan yet again go 1-2 at a high-level championship, she finishes 17th. Disappointing. This is really her last big chance at a high-level international medal. She has the one U.S. gold. We'll say that. She has the one U.S. gold. But other than that, it's pretty much all bronzes. It's the 94, 97, and 98 U.S. bronze and the 95 world bronze that should have been a silver. So after this, like we talked about in Lipinski's episode, she does what most Olympic skaters do and does champions on ice for a while, till about 2004. But this is an episode of Double Lives. And so far, I've talked about one thing, so we can't really stop here. During her career, Bobek had a bit of a bad reputation. Like I mentioned before, she was called out for poor training discipline, multiple occasions, gaining a ton of weight before competitions, smoking cigarettes, and using a bunch of perfume to try to mask the smell. They had to have monitors for her when they went away to tournaments. She would go out to hook up with boys instead of training. And for changing coaches at least 11 times during her competitive skating career. She once said, quote, "I'm a very free spirit and open person. I don't hide much. Some people don't like the fact that I'm very open. Some people do. It's just the way people look at it." There's also another quote that I saw repeated a lot. I couldn't get full sourcing for, but essentially when confronted about her habits, she allegedly said, "I'm a teenager. That's what we do." To be fair, it's true. It's very true. High level athletes have to do so much from such a young age that they don't get to grow up the way normal people grow up. Normal teenagers do sneak out, smoke cigarettes, and go to hook up with people. I get her point, if indeed that is something that she said and not just apocryphal. If that was all this was, this would be boring. But something not a lot of teenagers do is get charged with first-degree home invasion. In November of 1994, around the same time as that dog bite incident, she gets charged with first-degree home invasion after she used an access code to enter a friend's garage and then into their house in Michigan. Allegedly, she went upstairs, took cash from a purse, but was caught when the homeowner arrives. She claimed that she was granted permission by another member of the household to enter the house and retrieve the cash, but the person who found her was like, no, this didn't happen. She was 17 at this point and legally an adult under Michigan's criminal law, but she was eligible for probation with the offense sealed from public record under the Holmes Youthful Trainee Act, which was a special law for youthful first offenders. Under this, she ends up getting sentenced to 2 years of probation and a choice between 50 hours of community service and 30 days in jail. However, information regarding this case gets leaked and spread widely through skating circles and the news media, despite it supposing to be confidential. Journalists argued that Michigan law allows journalists to release information about juvenile criminals if there is, quote, a compelling public interest. So all this information became widely known. And this is right before she's about to win the U.S. championships and finish third at the World Championships. I actually read the Michigan Court of Appeals opinion where they sympathized with Bobek that the information was leaked and how it went against the purpose of the Youthful Trainee Act, ruled that it wasn't cause for probation to be ended. In the presiding judge's dissent, they stated, defendant's plea was conditioned upon her assignment to youthful trainee status. Her desire to be placed on youthful trainee status is clear. She is a world-class figure skater who is subject to intense media scrutiny. She chose to plead guilty so that the crime would not be publicized and so that she would not have a criminal record that could jeopardize her skating career. The disclosure to the press of information regarding the crime and defendant's assignment to youthful trainee status rendered it impossible for a defendant to complete her probationary period in the anonymity required by the statute. So she pleads guilty specifically to get this sealed status and keep things confidential. And people in the skating industry spread it to news media, who then sue to get it publicized, saying that they have a compelling interest, going against the entire purpose of it. She's doing her best this year, but also everyone is judging her for being a criminal, even though no one should have ever found out about it. Still, again, this is another mistake as a teenager. That really isn't enough for double life, so let's fast forward a bit. When Bobek gets let go from Champions on Ice in 2004, she moves to New York City. She had no job, no high school education, no real life skills whatsoever. Her rent is paid by her mom, and she was given a $350 weekly allowance. Diaz, what do you think a 26-year-old living on their own in New York City with no job and no responsibilities is going to do?
Drugs.
The answer is drugs. Yay!
Woo! Everybody loves drugs.
Quote, I hopped onto the club scene. I made myself a party girl. Eventually, she was spending $200 a week on crystal meth. The rest of the money was going to clubbing clothes and eating on the cheap, a diet, quote, featuring crackers, ramen noodles, and SpaghettiOs.
I mean, I do love ramen and SpaghettiOs.
Well, and she doesn't still get some Campbell's soup from the ads?
SpaghettiOs is a Campbell's product.
Oh, okay. Okay, word.
Can you tell I've eaten way too many SpaghettiOs that I can very easily and confidently say that?
So, this girl in her late 20s is just partying and doing drugs all the time. In 2006, her mom tried to file a legal petition to get her into rehab, but it didn't work, and she ended up dropping the petition. And things continued to escalate. Eventually, in the summer of 2009, she was arrested in New Jersey and charged with level 3 conspiracy to participate in a crystal meth distribution ring. Prosecutors described her involvement as, quote, high level, and co-conspirators said her apartment in Manhattan was being used as the distribution center where people would come to pick up the meth that was being made in New Jersey.
If I had a nickel for each reference to a high-level crystal meth operation, whether fictional or real, I would have 2 nickels for this episode.
You would have 2 nickels. 10 whole cents, baby.
Nicole admitted only to obtaining drugs and meeting with a person she knew was a trafficker. She said she never sold the drugs.
I didn't sell the drugs, baby. I just took the drugs from the manufacturer and gave them to the seller.
Quote, where they got me, I was passed along something to a friend, and I didn't get a penny out of it. What I got was a little bit out of it, in parentheses, for her use, and that's why I did it. I didn't need to sell drugs because every Monday I had my $350 in the bank. That is the funniest argument for it. I swear I wasn't selling drugs. I get $350 a week. I only wanted more drugs, so I let them use my apartment. Nicole was able to afford bail. Her mom had kept good care of a lot of the money that she had earned and spent the pre-trial period seeing an addiction counselor, taking classes to get her GED, volunteering at a local ice rink in Palm Beach where she was staying with her mom. She was handling skate rentals, mopping floors, cleaning toilets, running the concession stand, and eventually was hired full-time despite still awaiting trial. The rink manager, Mike Bunting, who didn't know who Nicole was when she showed up begging to volunteer, said that after learning about her prior skating life, drug use, and criminal history, he was worried, but believed that she was truly turning her life around. Quote, I think I could tell. People with those issues, aka drug issues, are late for work, don't dress properly, act irritable. Nicole shows up on time, is well-dressed, handles herself well, and handles customers well. And that was enough for this guy to say, no, I don't think she's on drugs anymore. I'll hire her to work at my skating rink. Weirdly enough, another person who was very supportive of Nicole at this time was Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins.
Sure, why not?
So, according to the Chicago Tribune, Corgan, who is also a Chicagoan and an avid sports fan, first recognized Nicole when they met in a random encounter at O'Hare Airport in 1995. He just loved figure skating, so he knew who she was at this point, and they exchanged contact info. And they stayed in touch for a while, but had lost contact for several years until he read about her arrest. He said, he had dealt with drug and alcohol problems among members of his band and family for years, and as soon as he found out, he called Nicole's attorney to offer his help. During this period, he was speaking to her like 2 or 3 times a day, and even wrote to the judge overseeing the case for leniency, which is like the weirdest mashup or crossover I could think of. But you know what? I'm proud of Chicagoans for standing together on this. On June 18th, 2010, Nicole pleads guilty to a lower level 2 conspiracy, not the high level 3 conspiracy that they originally charged her on. The prosecutors asked for 1 year in prison. Instead, the judge, having been swayed by the actions that she'd taken over the previous year to improve her life and all of the letters of leniency from people like Billy Corgan, sentenced her to just 5 years of probation, 250 hours of community service, and a fine. After this, she skates publicly a few more times. A lot of her friends want to try to help her get back on her feet. There was a Stars on Ice show. There was a breast cancer charity event called Skate for Love. But there's still a time for a third act here, because Nicole Bobek runs away and joins the circus. A 2014 article in Ice Network literally starts off with the quote, "I am the woman who ran away with the circus." After this legal trouble and trying to improve her life, she discovers the Rainbow Circus Miami, and it's attached to South Florida Circus Art School, and she threw herself into learning something new. Quote, "When I was still getting back on the bandwagon with skating, I kind of ventured into a whole new artistic side by taking something different onto the ice. That's when I started doing the lira. Before you knew it, I was hooked." James, do you know what the lira is?
That's the big metal hoop that they swing from.
It is the big metal hoop.
Mm-hmm.
She becomes a hoop person. And she starts performing at shows all around South Florida and traveling with a traveling circus called Circus Pinder throughout Europe as the hoop girl. She also gets married this time to Pedro Santos Leal, another circus performer who spent 11 years touring with Cirque du Soleil Verakai as part of the Icarian Games. James, do you know what the Icarian Games are?
No, I do not.
Those are the guys that do the foot juggling of humans and other large objects.
Yeah, like they spin the dudes.
Yes, and Pedro and his brothers are all part of this Icarian Games doing foot juggling. Thanks to Nicole's Instagram account, where she has posted multiple times a week for the past decade, and posted about another vampire movie that I also like, Van Helsing, just yesterday that made me want to go watch it again. I watched that like 2 weeks ago as well. There's a good documentation of what happens after this. As late as 2018, she is still traveling the world as a circus performer before she settles down and has a kid. Obviously, congrats for Nicole. That happens really late in life. And her most recent posts have been a mixture of figure skating and circus stuff, including like using the lira on the ice and also like dangling above the ice with your figure skates on in the lira, which seems extremely dangerous, but maybe she's going to invent a cool new fusion of ice skating and circus performing and have a fourth life. When it comes to double lives, it felt like there's a negative connotation to that. Although I like the fact that, both you and Diaz didn't really have any real negatives for it. But I like the idea of up-and-coming America's sweetheart kind of thing, but also kind of overshadowed a bit by 4 of the most famous American skaters of all time that all happen to just be born at the same time. Then party girl and alleged and somewhat convicted meth ring distributor. And then circus performer. And possibly circus ice skate performer or inventor. And I just like that, as an interesting way of going about these double lives. But that's my guy. That's Nicole Bobek.
Okay, let's see. You had 3 lives. Mick Foley had, if we're including Mick Foley, I think we got 4 in there in total.
Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, Mankind, Dude Love. Yeah, 4 lives.
And then 2 of both. So we got 9 crammed in here. I mean, I know it's been a long episode, but that's 9 whole lives in there, folks. That's pretty good bang for your buck. Let's go ahead and bang this out. For Bobek, one thing that we got to consider, it's like 3 sequential lives. At the same time, though, same thing can be said for Moe Berg. I thought he was a spy while he was a baseball player, but he is just a baseball player and then a spy. I guess really the only question is, do we disqualify Mick Foley because he didn't live a double life, technically?
He did have a double life segment. Like his MPD literally manifested into a segment in which the third personality finally won out.
But even then, that's not a double life personality. That's a triple life personality there in that commercial.
That's totally fair. I mean, I'm sorry that my guy had too much shit going on.
I know. It's like, look, unless anyone's really gonna shout out here for Moe Berg, I think it's Mick Foley. And I don't. Many words have been spilt. We need not spill any more words on this.
Diaz was so passionate about it. Like, it's not worth getting to the argument whether Mick Foley's too good to Guy or anything, any other disqualifications.
Well, look, the only drama now is who goes on the plaque. Is it Mick Foley, the man who created all of these characters? Is it Cactus Jack, who was the most prolific of his in-ring? Is it Mankind, who is the most well-known of his wrestling personas? Or is it Dude Love, who I think is probably truest to the true inner soul of Mick Foley? I think Dude Love is who Mick Foley wants to be, but it's not who he is. He is Mick Foley. He is Cactus Jack. He is Mankind. And he is our inductee this week. Welcome to the Hall of Guy, Mick Foley. Long may you reign. And, dude, just stay away from me with that staple gun. You've used it enough. I don't need it anymore.
You are being handed a digital plaque just like everyone else, so you cannot hurt yourself with it physically. But that's our guys this week, and we appreciate you all joining us for this. Here's some things that are going to happen by the time this comes out real quick. First off, the Oakland A's will play their last game as the Oakland A's. And I don't have anything else to say about that. That's just kind of sad. So I thought we should take a moment to say it. But the other
John
thing,
Fisher.
Fuck John Fisher. The other thing that is happening, I guess, as this episode airs, we as a show celebrate our 3rd anniversary. I'm not sure if Diaz or Xavier knows that this is the 3rd anniversary episode, but it is. So there's a fun surprise to you if you, hey, feel like getting us something. It is actually right now the drive time for Wikipedia, one of my favorite resources. As I mentioned, I am unsurprisingly a longtime Wikipedia supporter, and I would just recommend that you do that if you, like us, have at some point checked Wikipedia during the run of this now 3-year running show. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that before I take a moment to thank some people. Those people including, of course, producer Craig, the coders behind him, our musical director Don Ham for that lovely theme music, and most of all, you, dear listener, especially anyone that has joined us for all 3 of those years. We hope that you join all 3 of us next time when we come back with yet another episode. If you want to do that in the meantime, you can find all the ways to do that at bit.ly/remember that guy, all one word, all lowercase. That's all I've got this week. Anything else from you guys?
Nothing from me.
Go Birds.
Go Birds. I've been one of your hosts, James.
I've been the very special guest, Xavier.
And I'm Diaz. And in honor of 3 years, 3 of us, and in honor of the new Zelda, we combine our power, our courage, our wisdom. We at RTG have officially formed the Guy Force. The ref
Xavier, I think you're good. If you can hear me, Xavier.
So
I heard everything. It's fine. it didn't work the way I thought it was going to. I didn't mute Diaz. I muted myself, which is not the way to do that. I was like, oh well, I only hear a little bit. It's fine. And then the volume went up for the climax of that story, and I heard the whole thing. So it is what it is.
Well, hey, the match isn't over. We're not at the climax of the story yet. So,
James, why did you say I could come back?